All right, at least this is the video that I have been waiting for. Today we are comparing the new Thypoch Samara 28mm f1.4 to the new Voigtlander 28 1.5. Both are relatively inexpensive for the Leica world. Both are a fast aperture 28mm lens, but which one is better? Which do I prefer? Let's find out. So thanks to Thypoch for sending this over. I do get to keep this lens, which is great. And then thank you to CameraQuest for allowing me to test out this 28mm Nocton here. I do not get to keep this lens. I do have to send it back to them, but want to make sure that all of that is out of the way in terms of my disclosures here. And also a debut on this channel of the new Nikon ZF. I just got the TechArt adapter in today, so definitely a video coming out on this pretty soon, but definitely wanted to kind of show this in the different ways because I know not everybody is going to be, using a Leica camera specifically, and I've heard a lot of good things about the Thypoch lenses on specifically the ZF, but also mirrorless cameras. So I had to pull up the specs just to make sure I was getting all my information correct. One thing to note is that in terms of the Nocton here, there are two different versions. Both are optically the same, but one's made of brass and more traditional to the Leica system, and one is made of, I believe, aluminum. And so that definitely helps you in terms of weight savings, because the version 1, which is the, I think, aluminum one, is 250 grams, where the brass version is 330 grams, kind of like what Leica has done with the M11 here. This is the aluminum top plate versus the brass top plate to save some weight. Just to throw that out there, that's going to be one of the differences. And also for the aluminum version, you save 50 bucks. So there's that. And speaking of money, the Thypoch comes in at $699, where the Voigtlander here comes in at $1,050 to $1,000, depending on which version you get. Savings of about $300 on the Thypoch versus going for the Voigtlander route. Now, there are a ton of similarities, but a ton of just like tiny little differences, so I'll try to make sure I hit all of those. First of all, the Voigtlander is a 1.5 lens, and the Thypoch is a 1.4 lens. I thought, might not make a difference, but it seems actually to make a decent amount of difference. Even on this really boring test chart, which we'll get to later, you can see that my Rolleiflex, which is over there in the background, is definitely more out of focus looking in the image from the Thypoch. So despite the fact that it's like 0.1 in the aperture difference here, it does seem like in terms of t-stops, maybe it's a significant difference. The Thypoch also has 11 elements in 7 groups, where the Nocton has 10 elements in 8 groups. You have a 14-bladed aperture on the Thypoch, where you have a 12 on the Nocton. So plenty, but 14 is wild. 12 is amazing as well. So if you're going to be stopping down and still wanting circular bokeh, definitely going to be able to get that out of both of these lenses. You can definitely tell that the Nocton is a little bit smaller here in terms of diameter, and that comes in where the Thypoch is a 49mm filter thread, and then the Nocton is a 43mm. And then the Thypoch is also just a little bit thicker and a little bit taller than the Nocton, not by a ton. And in terms of weight, officially these things weigh the exact same. So it is 330 and 330. But because this one from the Nocton is brass, it definitely feels a lot chunkier, a lot heavier than the Thypoch. Now, if you want to see more about my initial thoughts on this, you can definitely check that out in this video that I'm going to tag up here. And then in terms of all the little extra funny specs that go on with the Thypoch here, I definitely talked a lot about that in my initial video for the 35mm, so you can check that out as well if you want to learn more about just the little intricacies of this lens, because I'm not going to get into all of the focus scales and everything like that, because I think that it's more interesting to just figure out what the images look like, what's the better use case, all that kind of stuff. One other little thing to note, the Thypoch does come with a lens hood where the Voigtlander does not. I don't know why Zeiss and Voigtlander have never really included lens hoods with their lenses, but it's definitely a bummer because with wide angle lenses, sometimes, having a lens hood is really nice. And when I'm out doing professional gigs at weddings and stuff, I always put the lens hood on. at least these lenses, just so I can make sure that if it's going to bump into something or like hit a chair or something, I'm not going to be destroying the front elements of my lenses. Now, more little subtle differences here. The Thypoch goes down to 0.4 meters in terms of close focus, where the Nocton goes down to 0.5. And at least on this brass version, I don't know about the aluminum one, but it has a more traditional focus tab here, which is definitely preferable. It is the at least for me, it is like the traditional Leica version of doing things. The Thypoch here has the infinity lock, which can be nice, especially if you're using it on this camera, because you put the lens to infinity and then you use the autofocus adapter. But you do have to pop it in and out of the infinity lock. And then it has the more old school focus tab of sorts, which is fine, but it's not my favorite of the differences here. But what it does have as well in terms of that close focus is when you get past that 0.7 meters where you are on a Leica camera on a rangefinder, you definitely have a detent here, which is fantastic. It's so nice to be able to be using a lens on a Leica camera and know exactly where both endpoints are that the rangefinder can actually focus to. And then if you want to go beyond that, it's a little extra click there. But then I can know that if I need to use that, I'm going to be using live view on the Leica M11. So overall, they are pretty similar in terms of specs, how they feel. They're also just like ever so slightly different in almost all those categories. So we'll jump in and see how these images actually look like overall, and then I'll give you my final thoughts here. Both these lenses are really great. I would say they both perform pretty well. In my testing here, it seems like the Voigtlander, just in my feeling of it, is a little bit sharper. It feels like the way that the focus falls off on the Thypoch is a little bit more like hazy, if that makes sense, and like a little bit smoother maybe. And then the Voigtlander is a little bit more contrasty. You can definitely tell in the sample images that they are not the same in terms of white balance. They definitely have a unique look to them in terms of color. But that being said, I was definitely happy with the optics on both. Neither are like incredible, which is, it's hard to say because I'm just used to using such incredibly sharp lenses that don't have chromatic aberration, anything like that. But also I'm using this on a camera that doesn't recognize these. So, you know, the Leica M11 can't do all of the little corrections in here. And neither of them I've seen have profiles in Lightroom as well. So it might be one of those things where its competitors might have some of those issues, but because the cameras have these built-in profiles and things, who knows, maybe that takes care of it more than others. Either way, I could definitely use these lenses in a professional environment, even wide open at 1.4 and 1.5. They're definitely sharp enough. And if I really felt like I needed a little bit more sharpness, I could stop down to f2, which is what I've been using with my Summicron for years now. But this is definitely a really, really nice option, especially if you have an M and you are just really wanting to get into that Leica Q feel in terms of imagery. And honestly, I have been really, really wanting to get a good 28mm fast aperture lens. I would have bought the Summilux if it wasn't so huge and it wasn't so expensive. And both of these kind of solved both of those issues for me. So if I'm being completely honest, there's part of me that is really considering selling my Summicron just because it's so much more expensive. And I don't need all that stuff, but it is so nice to have such a well-performing lens. So at least it's given me something to think about it in that way, which probably tells you how much I feel well about both of these lenses. And in terms of value, I think that both of them are definitely priced more than fairly. The Thypoch at $700 is definitely a bargain for sure. And then the Voigtlander, while $1,000 is maybe expensive feeling for a Voigtlander lens, I mean, that's not expensive at all in the Leica world. And you're definitely getting a look and an aperture in a focal length that is very, very unique. So I don't find that either of these are much of an issue. Obviously, the Thypoch is probably a little bit better value in terms of how much you're spending. But Voigtlander lenses do sell well on the secondary market just because they've been around for a long time, and we will see how well the Samara line and the Thypochs hold up in terms of secondary value. So hard to tell there, but I wouldn't say that either of them is like crushing it in the value category more than others, because I think that both of them are at a very fair price point. So thanks so much for watching. If you want to see more on the Voigtlander, you can check that out up here. If you want to see my video on the 35mm Samara 1.4, you can check that out up here, and I will see you in one of those videos.